Welcome, you guys. Wow. Can you believe it is already September? And with September comes the start of school. And with the start of school comes parents realizing that their kids aren't exactly where they need to be because of that summer slide. But today we have an amazing speaker here who's going to be sharing with us and sharing some incredible information from his book called Helping Your Child with Language-Based Learning Disabilities. We have Dr. Daniel Franklin with us today. And I got to tell you, I have been so impressed as I have gone through this book. I have never seen a book written so well with language that had so much empathy for the parent, for the child, for everybody included in the process. So you're going to get to learn today more about Dr. Daniel Franklin. Where does he come from? What does he do? Why did he write this book? And most importantly, how can a child with dyslexia learn? So I'm so excited you guys are here. This is going to be really, really awesome. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Daniel Franklin.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, and a big hello to your audience as well.
Yeah. So most of us are tutors in the house, and who doesn't want to be able to learn how to help these kids more with dyslexia? And I know you're not only are you an educational specialist, but you also coach others in how to become an educational specialist. That's how we actually met. Sean McCormick, you have worked with him, and my audience knows Sean McCormick very well. And so tell us, how did you get into this whole field of becoming an educational specialist?
Well, I always had an interest in education. I always thought one day I'd be a teacher, even as a kid, even in high school. I love school. I love learning. I love school environments. And right after college, I found a teaching position at an independent school in Massachusetts, where I'm from. The school had specialized in addressing the educational needs of kids with dyslexia. Part of working at that school is being involved in their rather comprehensive teacher training program, especially in the area of reading, writing, and spelling, or written language skills instruction. And so that's where I started. And after a few years of teaching there, I was both a classroom teacher. I taught junior high social studies and science, but I also became a reading specialist at that school. And several years later, decided to pursue my master's degree at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I was mentored by the late, great Jean Shaw, the queen of reading.
Stop. No. Oh my gosh. Okay, so those of you guys who are like reading like gurus like me, you've obviously heard of that name. So wow, that is quite impressive.
and she was impressive and a wonderful person to have as a mentor and a teacher. And I taught for her in what is now called the Jean Shaw Learning Center at Harvard University. And it was really pivotal for me. And while there, I developed an interest in educational psychology. And so I applied to and got into UCLA Graduate School of Education, where I pursued my PhD in educational psychology. Though I did not go on to become an educational psychologist, I went on to become an educational consultant and the founder and president of my educational services company, Franklin Educational Services.
Oh, that's awesome. So how long have you had your own private practice for?
Oh, goodness. I started my private practice as a graduate student at UCLA. It was very small. It was really just me initially. But by the time I was getting my PhD, I had already had onboarded a couple additional coaches and instructors to work with me. And then about 17 years ago or so, it really began to grow quickly when I moved into some office spaces and then larger office spaces, then opened a second location, and the growing has not stopped.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Like, I'm inspired just by this intro part, you guys. Like, holy cow. Like, unbelievable. Elizabeth Compararo, she is also from Massachusetts, as am I. Did we chat about that I was born in Massachusetts too?
I think some time ago we did, a month or two ago.
Yeah. So you were more were you more in the Boston area?
Actually, I'm from Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Cape Cod, okay.
The Outer Cape, where I will be this Saturday.
Nice.
I'm currently speaking to your audience from Los Angeles, California, where my company is based. But I'll be home for about 5 days, starting on Saturday. So I'm excited to get home, see my family, my parents, my siblings, my nieces, my nephews. Really excited to get home soon.
Oh, very nice. Very cool. Yeah, I was from a small town called Auburn, Mass. We call it Auburn. It's spelled Auburn, but we can't pronounce anything with R's. Very cool. And Elizabeth was wondering, which school was the first one that you had referenced in Massachusetts? I know you had mentioned Harvard, but the first one was the dyslexia school, right?
Sure. Well, first of all, in terms of I was a college student at Boston University. And then the first school I taught at after I graduated from Boston University was Landmark School in Beverly, Massachusetts.
Ah, very cool. Awesome. You've had quite the star stage of people that you've gotten to come in contact with in the world of dyslexia. And in fact, Sally Shaywitz wrote she was one of the people that, she didn't write the foreword.
No, she wrote an endorsement.
She wrote an endorsement on it.
Yeah, and which is in the front jacket, I think. The first few pages.
Yeah, right. And it's right here too. Sally Shaywitz, right on there. Yeah, a thoughtful and empathetic book. That she used the same word I used.
Great minds think alike.
Great minds think alike. That's right. Well, I think that's the part that I feel like is missing in education when it comes to talking to these parents and really giving them guidance that they can hear and listen to and follow through with. I've heard of so many stories where there hasn't been empathy. I've experienced a very cold approach from teachers based off of data and facts versus the empathy for the child that's sitting in front of us. I've experienced it as well. So this really does give us a great thing. But so how in the world did you end up knowing like Sally Shaywitz and have her write on your book for you?
So let's see. I've always been very active in the broader education community, especially here in Los Angeles. But frankly, I speak nationwide. I speak at major conferences nationwide. I've done all the big ones and sometimes multiple times. And I just began to develop a circle of professional connections, and one led to another. And I was introduced to Dr. Shaywitz, 5 years ago or so. And she was really supportive of my book and was willing to read it and then write an endorsement long before my book was even published.
Oh my gosh, that is incredible. And sometimes it can be scary sometimes to send our work out to people of this high stature, right? Like, oh my gosh, like what are they going to think? And so I can only imagine how you felt when she came back and was like, I love it.
Yeah, it was very gratifying.
Yeah, and it takes such a different approach than her book. I mean, her book also helps parents, but it's a 600-pager here, like 587 pages. And so that can be like when we're talking about really helping kids with dyslexia and you've got a parent who's trying to help, this can be overwhelming. It's a great read. It's a great read for tutors. It's a great read for parents. But I feel like sometimes we just need that practical side of things that we can put into process. Like hers really helps those people that they really haven't come to grips with what dyslexia is and how can I help. Whereas yours kind of goes through, hey, there's a lot of different language learning disabilities. We're going to go over what they are, how do they impact the child, and then how can you help? So what are some of the other language, we know there's dyslexia, what are some of the other language-based learning disabilities that are out there?
Sure, I'm happy to address that really important question. I want to just take it one or two steps back. First of all, Dr. Sally Shaywitz's book is extraordinary.
Yes.
Everyone should read it. Every parent who has a child with dyslexia should read it. It's an excellent book. When I wrote my book, my approach was a little different. I wanted something shorter, and I often, as I have said many times, I wrote my book as if I was writing a personal letter, to a parent about my experiences and how to support children. Yeah. So my book is a little more. Dr. Shaywitz's book is wonderfully academic, and very accessible. My book is less academic and more of a resource, and you don't need to read my book front to back. I encourage parents to flip through it and find sections and suggestions and pointers. So just wanted to share that distinction between my book, Helping Your Child with Language-Based Learning Disabilities, and Dr. Shaywitz's book. So increasingly, we see that children with dyslexia often exhibit many characteristics of children with ADHD. And children with ADHD often exhibit characteristics of children with processing disorders, difficulty processing spoken language, processing visual information. And we see this too with children with dyslexia. So instead of trying to just address one subtype within the broad range of learning and behavioral differences, many of us, myself included, are beginning to look at this as really a cluster. And in fact, there's a Venn diagram in my book illustrating how there's enormous overlap between dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, ADHD, processing issues. And increasingly, we see children with autism also share some of these difficulties too.
Yes.
And though I did not address autism specifically in my book is very helpful to any parent with a child with autism, because these strategies will also work well for children with autism too.
Is it okay if I show the picture with that overlap so people can see it?
Oh, please do, yeah.
So here's the page that he's talking about. I don't think I'm backwards here, but this is that overlap that you're referring to there.
That's right. Each ring represents a different area. One ring represents dyslexia, another represents ADHD, the other represents processing issues like visual processing and auditory processing challenges. And there's a lot of overlap. And if we get too tunnel focused on one issue, we sometimes overlook other important considerations. A really big one is comprehension. Whether a child has dyslexia or ADHD or processing issues, we see that they sometimes have a difficult time comprehending what they hear, what they read, what they're looking at. And so for us to become very active participants in supporting understanding and comprehension and clarifying where there are misunderstandings and reinforcing concepts is one of the ways we can really help, frankly, all children with any of the language-based learning differences.
That is so wonderfully said. And, I think that overlap, that diagram really helps us understand how they intertwine. Like I've always said to people, like dyslexia doesn't seem to always come by itself. It's got some other stuff that's like buried in there. Like if it was just dyslexia, maybe it would be easier to work with these kids. But you've got some kids that are struggling more with the processing, the short-term memory, long-term memory. You've got those kids then that have the ADHD. And then you have kids that they seem to have like just a little peppering of everything in there.
And they emerge at different times. So sometimes a child won't exhibit any characteristics of a child with ADHD, but the same child a day later may have pronounced ADHD-like challenges. So we need to be really flexible in our approach and really open-minded about how we're going to support all children, all learners at all ages.
Yeah. And I do feel that like the timing really does matter, because with I have found working with dyslexics, because I work online, I can work pretty late at night, but I never want to take my kids who are dyslexic and put them like at a time where they're going to be exhausted, because they're never going to perform very well for me, and they're not going to get as much out of the experience of getting them when they're wide awake. I've even actually worked with some dyslexics or early in the morning when they live in your neck of the woods, like right before school, because it's like they're the most wide awake, ready to go, and I can like work with them a little bit easier. So I think that's something to keep into like context when you're working with somebody who's dyslexic and you're like, oh my gosh, they sound so slow. It could be sometimes the time of day that they're reading to you, because they'll start off faster until they start getting tired, and then they will drop off. And
that's right. And it's why it's good to be flexible. If we see that we're not working with the child at a time that's kind of optimal, I mean, it's always good to try to soldier on just a little bit.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, it's okay to put down what you're doing and do something else. go outside, run around, play a sport, dance, sing, do something, cook, do something fun, and just change it up.
Yeah. You had started talking about really your experience as a learner in the beginning of this book and some of the struggles that you had. And you had mentioned this is like really the first time that you had like put this down like on paper, and you were kind of reliving the experience and what a great source your parents were to you with your specific situation and all of that kind of stuff. And, could you share with our listeners what was learning like for you when you were a kid?
Well, it was very challenging. I had and still have very pronounced dyslexia. I have 4 other siblings, and all of them learned to read quickly and easily and became really skilled at written language. I, on the other hand, really struggled learning to read and write, and frankly, manage a lot of the demands of school was exceedingly challenging for me. I was frankly a non-reader and a non-writer until 5th grade. And finally, in 5th grade, I had the benefit of working with an amazing teacher, Mrs. Shirley Gott, with whom I remained close friends with for many years. She passed away at 89, only just a few years ago, but I always remained in touch with her. There's actually a short documentary featuring both her and me. It's called Unteachable, which your viewers and listeners can see at danielfranklinphd.com.
I'm going there.
And there's a link called Unteachable. It is made by the award-winning filmmaker Anthony Sharon, who makes short documentaries. It's only 11 minutes, but it's a very poignant short film about the critical role of healthy, positive relationships between teachers and students. At any rate, it was with her help when I entered 5th grade and had the great fortune of ending up in her classroom. And she really realized that I was going to need a different approach. I was going to need a lot more individual attention. I was going to need a lot more encouraging and support. And when you struggle as a student, unfortunately, a lot of teachers think you're lazy, you're not trying, or don't want to learn, which was not the case with me at all. I wanted to learn and I wanted to develop skills. I wanted to be a good reader and a writer, but I wasn't. And she knew that. And she really took me by my hand and gave me a lot of individual one-on-one tutoring at different times of the day whenever she could fit it in. And I actually had her as my teacher for 6th grade too. And she changed my life. And it really, one person, one teacher can really do that.
Yes.
So by the time I entered 7th grade, I, of course, still had rather significant dyslexia, and I was not a strong reader or a strong writer, but I had a little momentum and a lot of motivation, and I soldiered on all through junior high and high school, worked really hard to get into Boston University, where I was a history major, and again, learning and doing well in college as an individual with dyslexia is challenging, but with support and finding appropriate bypass strategies, students can manage college too. So dyslexia is something, it's a characteristic you have throughout your entire life. I'm still a very slow reader. I love reading. I read a lot. I'm a very slow writer. I love writing. I write a lot, but it's a very slow process for me. And to this day, I still do some of my best writing when I'm actually dictating my thoughts to one of my colleagues here at the office. I have the good fortune of having an amazing team around me. And at certain points, I'll ask one of my colleagues, I'll say, I'm at that point where I think I really just need to close my eyes and literally hold my hands over my eyes and speak while they write. And much of the book you're holding was actually written that way. With the support
wow. That is very cool. And, I think a lot of people don't realize that, look, just because you have dyslexia, it actually doesn't mean that you're not a good learner. and I think that a lot of people think, I think we as a society have a misunderstanding of dyslexia and thinking that kids who can't read are dumb. And that is not the case. I find that you'll see if you ever read Overcoming Dyslexia, the kids with dyslexia have a high IQ. Extremely high IQ. So here you are. You're one of the most brilliant men alive, Daniel Franklin.
Nice of you to say.
So there you go. And there are different ways that we can adapt and we can still be able to survive very well in a literate world as a dyslexic. And my whole premise is like, look, all kids can learn to read. They just need the right people to show them. And you have it. In time. Yeah, it's going to take time. Yeah.
One of the mistakes we often make with children is we expect them to be able to do something before they're developmentally ready to do it.
Right.
There's another illustration in my book. It's called the skill discrepancy graph. I think it's around page 40. And what we know is a lot of very capable learners. I was one of them. I'm a very skilled reader and writer, but I was not developmentally ready for reading and writing at the level I needed to do it until I was older than other kids.
Yeah.
And that while these developmental capacities are coming online, we really need to provide a very high level of proactive support to all kids who need it, whether it's because they have dyslexia or ADHD or processing differences, or children with autism who are learning some social communication skills. All of these kids can acquire great skill, great capacities, but they're on a different timetable. And we don't want to rush it, because when we ask more of a child than what they can do, it only makes them anxious, it makes them feel discouraged, and can really slow the process down ultimately.
Yeah, it really can. And, I talk a lot about, I feel like in college, I learned a lot about the zone of proximal development. I feel like as soon as I stepped into the school system, which is based on grade levels versus the zone of proximal development, the idea never came up again. And for me, that idea started coming on out again as I started working with my students one-on-one and helping them with reading. And I started thinking, what's different about what I'm doing today than what I did in the classroom? Because the way I teach in person is different, like online is very different than what I did when I had kids where I was following like a program and doing all of that. And I realized the big difference is the zone of proximal development. There are kids that are ready for certain skills at certain times. And if we can find out what skills they're ready to learn and teach them that skill, it is actually amazing how quickly they can start beginning to learn compared to sometimes what our expectations are and what they should be able to do.
That's right. And of course, the zone of proximal development, a major feature is providing high levels of carefully scaffolded support while those skills are coming on. That I think sometimes we're not providing, a lot of people gripe that we provide kids with too much help. I don't agree with that. I think in some instances it may be the case, but generally speaking, we need to provide a high level of individual one-on-one support. Joanne, I often say this: the difference between a helpful parent and a helicopter parent is this. A helpful parent provides the help that's needed. A helicopter parent provides help that's not needed. And kids with language-based learning disabilities need a lot of help. So you're not being a helicopter parent if you're providing a lot of help to your child with language-based learning disabilities. Right. You're being a helpful parent. And we don't want to pathologize the help that parents are providing their children if their child needs that high level of ongoing support in all areas of school and life. If they need someone to help them organize their book bags or binders or study area, to create a wall calendar, to be there to scaffold when it's time to do homework. Hey, let's put your book bag up on the table. Let's take out the things that we need today. Let's open up to the page we need to start on, and be there to walk through the process while that child is developing the ability to do that with increasing levels of independence. But until a child has those capacities, the executive demands of school can exceed what they're capable of, and these children quickly begin to fail and fall behind and feel discouraged. And that does not need to be the case. We really want to help and provide proactive support at all levels, as long as a child, teen, or even a young adult needs it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So well said. And I think that's one of the pieces with when they do have a language based learning disability and executive functioning skills, specifically, sometimes they can't respond to more than one direction at a time. So when parents are like, parents assume that the kids know the steps they have to take when they're like, okay, did you do your homework? And they're like, yeah. And then they find out from the teacher, yeah, they didn't do the homework. They did two problems and then they quit. To them, they were done. They were done doing their homework. Like they are interpreting it completely different. And parents then get upset and they get, agitated when these things happen. But when we say, okay, did you take your homework out? Okay, did you work on problem one? Okay, now sometimes it's problem two. Sometimes it has to be broken down in such basic levels that we think, gosh, they're such a bright kid. Like, why can't they figure this out? It has nothing to do with are they bright or not, right? It's just that part of that language-based disability.
There's times we need to be unashamed, unabashed micromanagers. And I know being a micromanager has a bad rap, but the reality is when the demands exceed capacities, kids, teens, young adults need a micromanager, and we need to make them feel comfortable with that and understand that to be successful in the things that we do, sometimes we need a lot of help. I run a very successful educational services company, but I get a lot of help. I have an amazing executive director, an amazing director of education, a business manager, and a lot of other amazing team members all around me who allow us to do what we do because we're a team. We work together and we help and support one another in a very direct, proactive way. And children need a very similar type of help to manage sometimes the overwhelming demands that school place on them, especially if those kids have slowly emerging written language skills, reading and writing skills, slowly emerging attentional capacities, children with ADHD, or other issues, developmental issues like autism or any of the other related learning and behavioral differences that can make school really challenging at times.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because, there are tendencies to want to avoid and not take part and separate themselves and do other things. This last year with the pandemic was crazy. I have a friend whose son would play video games while the controller was down here and the TV's over there and they're having math class. So he's looking here and over here and over here and over here, right? The teacher doesn't know, right? So it had a lot of, like, the parent actually came on in and was like, no, you're going back to school. Because this is, we want to disengage when we are not feeling supported. And I think that this was like a really rough year for a lot of these kids that needed more support, and some of them got less support than what they need. I'm curious, you talked about before learning and the difficulties that you had with learning, but that with dyslexia, you still could learn. So what are some things that you put into place so that you could still learn in your other subjects, even though you had dyslexia?
Well, let's remember that for individuals with dyslexia, their reading skills and writing skills come on slowly and are greatly delayed. And so while a child, any child, frankly, with dyslexia or without, while a child is learning to read, they cannot read to learn. Until an individual is a skilled reading is not a good way to acquire information. So we want to think in terms of bypass strategies. So while a child is developing the skill of reading, if they are expected to do a lot of learning from reading, we want to become very active in the bypass strategies. We often call it the hierarchy of reading support. At the highest level, we want to read the material ourselves, think about it, and explain it. Another level down would be reading the material aloud to the child and explain and check for understanding as we go. After that, it's having the child read the material to us aloud. And at the lowest level of support, the child reads the material themselves silently and we check for understanding. The point is we need an approach to supporting learning when reading is the source of the information and reading skill is still coming online. So at the highest level of support, let's look at the chapter, let's look at the reading material, let's read it or read it aloud and explain it and bypass the slowly emerging reading skill. In a similar vein, while we're learning to write, we can't write to learn. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, all of us have had this experience. We sat down to dash off a quick 30-second email, and 30 minutes later, we're drafting a much longer email. I know everybody's had that experience. I certainly have. And well, what are we doing? Well, we're using writing as a thinking tool, and we can because we're skilled writers. We begin to use writing to develop an idea, to explore new ideas, to create connections between other ideas, and we're using writing as a thinking tool. And as skilled writers, we can because we've learned to write. But for a child who is learning to write, they cannot do that. So we want to become very actively involved in the writing process when a child has a writing assignment. We want to look at the assignment together with the child, discuss it together, think about what we want to be talking about, begin to take notes together, begin to ask questions of the child about the topic, give them prompts, make suggestions, do research, and of course, carefully annotate everything we do while we're supporting a child with this type of writing support, because when we're done with the writing assignment, it'll be pretty good, and the child will have done a good job, and frankly, will have learned a lot about the writing process by approaching a writing assignment this way. Mm-hmm. We do, of course, want to share our process with the child's teacher so that they understand what was required to achieve this outcome, this good outcome of a completed writing assignment that was done well. So keep all your notes, explain the process you're going to use to your child's teacher, keep your notes so everything can be submitted to the teacher so they can understand what was done, how it was done, and how you got to the final place you got with that particular writing assignment. Mm-hmm. Other areas also need a high level of scaffolding, preparing for tests and quizzes. We want to become really actively involved in the preparation process ourselves, whether you're a parent or a tutor or a teacher or an educational therapist or anybody else. You want to look at what is it that the child needs to know and will be tested on, and how do we begin to develop a test preparation strategy that we become actively involved in so that when the time comes to take the test, the child has a much higher level of success.
Yeah. And when they go through that process, they have that ability to do well on that test.
That's right.
Okay, so as a parent, I got to tell you what was going through my mind, thinking. So all of this is happening in the evening time when the parents they're exhausted from their long day of work. Their emotions are ready to spark at any moment in time. And the child has had a long day at school and their emotions are ready to spark, at any point in time. And so I think that one extra piece is be compassionate with yourself. Like if you are a parent or even if you're a tutor and you're starting to feel frustrated with some of these students, be compassionate with yourself and know if you need to walk away for a moment and say, I'm going to be right back. I'll be right back. I just need a moment. Because I think when our emotions start coming on them, they start feeling like something's wrong with them, and it can be really hard.
This is so critical what you're saying. As it turns out, as long as children have a close, secure, healthy relationship with their parents or a parent, they tend to be resilient in life. They tend to do well. But if we allow school to completely disrupt and destroy our relationship with children, we're not seeing the forest for the trees. And so sometimes you have to prioritize the quality of your relationship with the children you're responsible for other considerations. And if having to do something school related is going to become really explosive and really detrimental to the relationship, I think we need to look at that and say, you know what, my child is going to be fine as long as he or she knows that they have a healthy, positive relationship with me as the parent throughout their childhood and life, frankly. Yeah. So when we prioritize relationships above other considerations, we're really doing the very best we can for a child. Remember, the human brain is a social organ. It only develops well in the context of healthy relationships. So when we focus on providing children with healthy relationships with the adults around them, these children are resilient. There's even a body of evidence on that. It's documented by the terrific author Robert Brooks' book, Raising Resilient Children, where he's looked at the research on children who have healthy, positive relationships with adults are resilient and do well. Children who do not have healthy, positive relationships tend to struggle. And so we really need to prioritize the quality of the relationships these children have above other considerations if we really want to help them in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a key point is that the relationship is more important at the end of the day. And there are other things that we can do. I mean, that's why there's people like us that are out there to be able to help, right? Like the parent doesn't have to do this all alone. There are resources and tools that can help support as they go through. And I don't think that enough of these parents, because there's kind of a separation between the school system and the private practices, right? A little bit. And they don't know what's really available to them to be able to help and support them. I'd never heard about when I was in the school system as a teacher that there were educational specialists out there getting paid that were helping parents be able to navigate, executive functioning skills, study skills. I kind of had the idea that there were like tutors helping with dyslexia, but I didn't know anybody who did that. So there's like this, I feel like between the school system and the teachers and the private practices, there's almost like a disconnect. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, there certainly can be, and it's unfortunate. The old saying, communication is a key to success. And it really is. Whether we're communicating with the other adults, whether it's a spouse or other adult partner we're working with, communication with kids, communications with a child's teachers or the other clinicians. And so when we can really work on a lot of proactive types of communication, in my book, I provide some examples of different ways and types of communication we can start and maintain with a child's teachers. And always approaching communication as not only essential and fundamental to a child's success at school, but also understanding that communication, successful communication, comes out of a place of empathy, a high level of mutual respect, patience, and understanding. And all of us need to realize there are a lot of things going on around us that we don't control, and often getting comfortable with the things that we can't control and say, okay, the situation is what it is, but at a fundamental level, I need to stay sort of spiritually intact. I need to stay connected to my family members, to the important people around me, and that's really the priority in terms of being able to prevail and to manage those times in life when things are really challenging. Goodness, I mean, just look at the world around us right now. There's a lot going on that's nerve-wracking and unsettling. But as long as we can stay in a healthy place in our own hearts and minds and really focus on the quality of the relationships with the people right around us, we will prevail. We certainly will, and we will overcome all these challenges. And there are times at the end of school day when kids come home from school and something needs to be done and things aren't going well. I think we can put school responsibilities aside occasionally, but certainly for a period of time, if that's what it takes to get back to a healthy place in our own heart and also in the hearts of the children around us and the things that we do to preserve the health and well-being of our families as a whole.
Oh my gosh. I think that like every kid when they enter school just needs to like have a conversation with you every parent, like they enter school or there's somebody like you, like that could just kind of explain some of these stuff. Like, here's some of the pitfalls you're going to run against as you begin working with your child, or if your child is starting to struggle, you start to notice they're struggling, here's what you can do. Or just because we go into this as parents completely blind, we have no idea what resources and tools are out there and what's available. We don't think about the relationship all the time. We just think of ourselves. Sometimes people think of themselves as the parent. You do as I say. I say it's homework time, you do it. Just go and do it. And these kids sometimes aren't capable of doing that. And they don't think about the relationship and how harmful that is, because that's the way they were raised, And I think a lot of the way that we're raised sometimes determines, and unless you get to go into the education field, I feel like education field really helped me become a better parent. Like the education field, psychology, all of that kind of stuff. We start understanding the inner workings of people. Otherwise, you kind of repeat what happened to you without even realizing it's happening. To even notice that this isn't the way it's supposed to be, because your whole life you've experienced it like this, because this is the way your parents parented, and so now you're living your life here with your kids, and so you're raising them the way you think you should based off of how you were parented. It's kind of a cycle.
It is a cycle, and it's very normal. It's very common, and it's not catastrophic. All of us will bring some of our experiences as a child and our own family life experiences into the families that we are rearing and raising ourselves. That's normal. What's important to note, though, is yes, when we're aware that we might be repeating some cycles that did not prioritize the quality of the relationship, did not prioritize the need to be empathic and create a sense of relatedness and connection to those around us. These are the things that can begin to bring about positive change in areas where things might not be optimal. Mm-hmm. The important thing is people are resilient, children are resilient, and we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And long as we can find a place of comfort and peace in our own hearts and our own minds, those around us will begin to acquire a place of comfort and peace in their hearts and minds too. But we must lead by example.
Yeah.
We must. There's a quote in my book, and her name is Edith Solwell is the name, and she says, "Children do not listen to what we say; they listen to who we are." Mm. And those words have always resonated with me. I learned that teaching junior high school, actually. I learned that with junior high kids, you can bark and shout and be a disciplinarian. It doesn't help. What helped was for me to be the kind of person I wanted my students to be. And no matter what happened, I wasn't that way at first. Believe me, my first few years of teaching were really challenging, especially teaching junior high. But by about my third year, I found a place of peace and calm that I was able to maintain in the classroom, even when a lot of things weren't going right around me, as often happens with seventh graders and eighth graders. I actually came to appreciate the beauty of what's going on. This is normal for seventh and eighth graders to be doing these things and mm-hmm. being who they are, and just really appreciating the majesty of that reality and getting comfortable with it helped me be a successful junior high teacher.
Yeah, it's so funny. I taught in the inner city in Milwaukee, and I was third grade and fourth grade. My kids were much younger, but their maturity level, unfortunately, was a lot higher because of their circumstances. And so, they're having to live in a world at a higher level than most third, fourth graders. And a lot of anger and anxiety existed in their lives, and they wanted to fight and they wanted to shout and they wanted to hurt people. And I remember my first year being really hard because I was that disciplinarian, came on out like, no, you got to do that. No, time to do this, time to do that, like barking orders, right? And I realized in my second year, so my school realized she's struggling. Let's get her some help. So they said, hey, we have a class. It's called behavior management class. would you be interested in taking? I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, I so need that. So I recognized I needed this, right? So I go into this class and I realized I was half the problem. I was like, oh my gosh, like I brought my childhood into like how I started managing these kids. And what I needed to be focusing on was how to build relationships with them. And that class taught me how to do that. So like one of the strategies they had was like, take the student for just 5 minutes and like before class even starts and just ask how are things going for them. Just chat with them, get to know them. Do this every day for 14 days. Oh my gosh, I did this with each of my kids that really struggled the most, and I ended up building the deepest relationships with them just based off of that one tactic right there. And ever since then, whenever I teach my students, I've realized the importance of building that relationship, because that relationship is what allows you to be able to teach them.
That's a beautiful example, and it's so powerful what that strategy can do and the changes it can bring about, not just for kids, but for you as a teacher. And frankly, I guarantee you, those kids were bringing those lessons home to their parents and families too. And, sort of the ripple effect, you act compassionately and kindly, and the ripples move out and begin to affect the world around us. And I'm so delighted to know you had that amazing opportunity and you became that teacher, the teacher who could do that thing, connect and heal. The children experience a lot of trauma, and that group of kids you just described to me are children we know experience a lot of trauma. There's a wonderful scale out there, a survey. It's called ACEs, ACES. It stands for Adverse Child Experiences. There's only 10 items on it. I encourage all of your listeners and viewers to just Google the ACEs scale, I think it's called, or survey, and read the 10 types of trauma that are common in the lives of children, and to realize that even if one of those types of trauma exists in a child's life, it has an adverse effect on their ability to manage a lot of life's demands. It's called ACEs. It's only 10 items. It's really easy to find in a Google search. And it's changed me as an educator. It's changed a lot of the teachers I work with as well, because they begin to realize that the children they're working with are experiencing trauma on a daily basis.
Yeah. There are so many kids, right? And even the kids that we're tutoring, you guys, some of them have experienced some of this. And when we can come at our tutoring from the most empathetic place, and, I have seen amazing things happen with my students, and it's amazing. And when I first started tutoring online, people are like, you can't do that. Or people would say things like, tutoring online, like, how do you build a relationship with somebody online? I'm like, you would be surprised. The relationships that I have with my students online and their families is unbelievable. And I absolutely love it. I can't imagine doing it like any other way. I enjoy the relationships I have in person, but I enjoy my relationships I have online with these students equally. It's not better or worse. I kind of see like the Zoom thing being like, it's just a tool. It has nothing to do with how things are being taught. It's just a tool. It's just the medium. Whether somebody's here or whether they're here, that piece doesn't change. And the relationships, if you can build a good relationship in person with kids, you're going to build a great relationship with them online too.
Without a doubt. And I think all of us are getting accustomed to communicating and connecting and learning from one another this way, as we are at this very moment, which, I did a little bit of Zoom meetings in the previous 5 years, but it's really been in the past year and a half that it's feels quite normal and natural.
I know, right? Very natural. Very natural. When you start getting into it, you're like, oh, this is actually quite fun and not so bad.
And, if we had to meet in person, Joanne, we would never connect it because we live 1,500 miles apart.
Right. We probably never would have, right? And it was like so easy. Like all of a sudden, like Sean's like, hey, you guys need to connect. And I was like, yes, we do. And like that, we were able to set up a Zoom meeting and be able to connect without having to go and fly and have to put on our masks and worry about all that stuff. So yeah. And these are some of these traumas that we're talking about that can impact the learning as well. And so do you feel that like dyslexics who are experiencing just one of these traumas, that it's going to take them longer to learn, or like how is their learning then affected by that?
Sure. Trauma is complex, and I think sometimes it can be easy to overstate trauma, but it can be easy to understate it as well. We do know that any child who's experiencing high levels of anxiety and insecurity for any reason, and we know children with developmental differences like dyslexia or ADHD or autism, we know these children are experiencing high levels of chronic anxiety and stress. We know that because they struggle in so many different ways, that a lot of their interactions are not always positive. And so children with developmental differences, all developmental differences, whether we're talking about the mild to moderate differences of individuals such as myself with dyslexia, or children with the moderate to severe, sort of the pronounced types of neurodevelopmental differences, all of these children are experiencing a form of trauma.
Yeah, they are. They really are.
And so we want to, and we know that what is indicated in terms of appropriate treatment for children who are experiencing trauma are things like being calm around them, reducing the number of words we say in any given minute. As a general rule, when I'm talking to a child who has slow language production, I try never to say more words in a minute than they produce. So if we're working with a child who's only producing 3 or 4 words in a minute, and which is not uncommon, we need to slow down our language production and do more nonverbal communication when we can keep our tone warm and friendly and positive. I try not to use too many words and complex words. I will often use the same word over and over. Yeah. So when we're disciplining a child, discipline also has a negative connotation, I know, but discipline also means to study, to learn. And so when we're working with a child who's really dysregulated, instead of barking a lot of words like, hey, you sit down and be quiet and you need to be still and what you did was wrong, sometimes just saying something like gentle, 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 gentle. And I often do that with a child who's dysregulated because they're not really processing language well. But if we use one word over and over, they know we're being calm, that we're not overwhelming them, and that we're trying to help them get to a better place.
Yeah.
And so the word gentle even sounds nice.
Doesn't it?
Yeah,
it really does.
Yeah.
Do you have one for focus? Do you have one for focus? When the kids are like getting off focus.
So what I might say is I'll say, this is interesting. And I get focused myself on what it is I need the student to be focused on first. So and I write about this in my book, if you bring your attention to the task yourself as the adult and get really curious about it and get focused and say, oh, this is interesting. And then the child will naturally begin to get curious too. And so instead of saying, pay attention or look at this, just get focused on it.
Yeah.
And get genuinely interested in it. Sometimes, even if it's just a simple math problem, I'll say, oh, isn't it interesting when I add 3 to 3, I get 6. That is so interesting to me. And kids will get interested. And they will see that this is fun and engaging. And so be playful.
I love that.
Watch any young mammal, watch puppies or kittens or baby goats or baby horses or any young mammal. If they're not eating and sleeping, what are they doing? They're playing. Why do mammals play so much? It's because the play instinct is the instinct we need for learning. And so with children, we really want to leverage this natural tendency towards play to help them learn. And when we make learning and childcare and parenting and anything we do with a child a form of play, we get a lot out of them. I was helping a child in our learning center the other day. A whole bunch of potato chips had spilled out on the floor. And I said, I'm going to start counting potato chips as I pick them up. Do you want to do this with me? And that child was right there on the floor picking up potato chips with me because it wasn't, I wasn't barking out a command or an order.
Right, pick those up.
I turned it into a form of play, a fun activity, and it's something now that this particular child, we have potato chips all over the place around here. So we have potato chips on the floor all the time, which never really bothers me. I mean, children, we always call it a good problem when it's, child stuff. But turning these activities into a fun activity, a playful activity, is how we leverage the natural instinct towards play, not just of humans, but frankly, all juvenile mammals. It's natural to play.
I love that. And if we can take that dyslexic, you guys, and make it feel like play, that they're reaching these levels of success and that they can do this, and we are, guiding them as much as they need to be guided until they can slowly be released the entire process to themselves, you're going to have high levels of success. We want to be able to be that adult that they can learn from. And it's absolutely possible. And a lot of it comes down to, I find for me, I've had to do a lot of personal development. I read personal development books as my hobby. Like, my other hobby is crocheting, and I read personal development books because I constantly want to be that better person who can relate to people, have those positive relationships, treats myself with kindness, because a lot of times we don't treat ourselves with kindness, so that I can treat others with kindness. And those kinds of things are going to help you guys continue to be, really successful with these kids, and continue to learn yourself. Never stop learning. That's why we have the reading interventionist course. So if you guys are like, gosh, I really want to know how to help these kids that have dyslexia more, I want to, even just kids that struggle with reading in general, doesn't even have to be a kid with dyslexia, come join us. The course does close tomorrow night at midnight. Thank you so much, Danielle Franklin. You are an incredible inspiration. Your advice is so spot on. Your empathy just exudes out of you. And I'm glad that this isn't going to be the last time that we get to connect.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. From the outset, it's always fun speaking with you. We have work that just rewards us every day, just in the doing of it. And it's been a pleasure to be with you. And I encourage all of your participants to reach out to me. I respond to all emails. I'm easy to reach at danielfranklinphd.com. It's all one, danielfranklinphd.com. I'm easy to connect with. I return all emails, and I'm delighted to connect with anyone who's listening or watching today.
That's awesome. And do you still, do you offer online services as well with your students at all?
Oh, we do.
Okay, great.
We always had. It had been a small part of what we do. Then, of course, with the pandemic a year and a half ago, well over 50% of what we do now is virtual and online. And whether we offer fully accredited one-on-one schooling, we offer tutoring, we offer a wide range of other types of support, and all of it's available in person or online. And sometimes we do a hybrid, a little bit of each. depending on logistics.
Yeah, absolutely. Very awesome. Because I have a friend, I've already recommended her book to her. Like, you need to read this book. It's so good. It's going to help you with your son. And I know that she's looking for somebody that can help with these executive functioning skills. And it's like, oh my gosh, you need to reach out, because this would be like fantastic for him and amazing. So thank you so much for what it is that you do in the world, and thank you for supporting us as tutors by being here and sharing your wisdom with us.
It's been a pleasure. I look forward to talking again sometime soon.
Absolutely.